Counselor Accents Podcast. Two school counselors who love their jobs. Oh, and they happen to have Southern accents too. Bless their hearts.
I'm Kim Cramley.
I'm Laura Rancorn.
And together we are Counselor Accents. And I say accents because there's two of us, but I almost had the empire, and it was the Counselor Accent. Kim Cramley.
You almost had it too.
Almost had it all. Almost had it all. I know our listeners and viewers do not know of your near-death experience, but let me just say your husband and I were doing a lot of calling. I thought the whole empire was going to be mine. I was going to get it all. Husband.
I hate to disappoint you.
But you lived.
I lived, and I apologize for the way that I sound. I'm still not back to normal. But I had more than one brush with death this week. So it's been a rough week.
So what has it affected your voice? How does the gallbladder affect the voice? Are you just trying to sound pitiful?
No, it's where during surgery, they put the tube down my throat.
Oh, you're really enjoying it, aren't you? I mean, everything.
Loving every minute of it. And I can't cough to clear my throat because my incisions had to be larger than the average cat's because it was a cat. It was the size of a cat that came out of me.
And I love the way you've not even tried to be attractive about this. You've been blasting these pictures for everyone to see. And I'm like, I would not be showing this. I will not. There are images burned in my mind that I will never be able to.
That is incorrect. That is incorrect. That is my husband that's been sharing them far and wide. That is not me. I showed them to you, I think, but that's it.
So a week ago today, was it not?
It was Saturday.
Saturday
morning at
1 a.m. So that makes it Sunday.
No, Friday to Saturday.
I got you. So 1 a.m.
Yeah.
Bladder gate begins. And you wake up in intense pain.
It was radiating. It was underneath my right set of ribs, and it was all the way around my back. And
I love the way you say set of ribs, like it's like ribs you eat.
Rack of ribs. It was under
your rack of ribs. The bladder is under the rack of ribs, and you're in pain. And
I need to tell you right now that we cannot have any laughter in this episode.
Okay, there will be.
I cannot laugh. It hurts. So don't laugh.
Our conversations have been. You'll be going, "Don't make me laugh. Don't make me laugh," and that's all we do. So it's been really hard.
A somber
conversations. So you end up going to the ER.
Yes, I went to the ER, and I would like to share a counseling moment from that time. So I had to drive myself there. So I drove myself to the ER. It's only 5 minutes away. So I walk in, it's like nobody's in there, and I check myself in. I'm moaning, I'm groaning. They have zero sympathy because they see this all the time.
Yes.
So I get in the emergency room, like in my bed, and I start throwing up. So that's disgusting. I'm so sorry to be talking about that. But anyway, this person came in to take my blood, and she said, "Oh, girl," she said, "I have been exactly where you are." And this moment of empathy, I was like, okay, a survivor. Like, thank you for letting me know that I'm going to make it. Like, what color is the survivor ribbon? I'm going to go ahead and pre-order it. And she said, "Oh, I feel for you because I've been exactly where you are." And I said, "Oh gosh, so you had gallbladder issues?" She said, "No." She said, "My son." And I was like, okay, well, she's the mother of a survivor. She looked 12, but still I thought, okay.
Yeah.
She said, "My son had his tonsils out, and all of a sudden he started having some problems, and he was coughing a lot and throwing up." She said, "I know exactly how you feel." And
did you grab her and say, "No, you don't"?
Well, I just thought, as counselors, this is a great way to teach what empathy is not, because she did not know how I felt. But anyway, so they said, "Yeah, we're 99% sure it's your gallbladder. they said, we're going to send you on home. And I was like, what? Because I was like writhing in pain. I couldn't sit still. I was flopping, flipping. They gave me a pain pill that didn't touch it. They gave me a shot of pain medicine in my hip that didn't do anything. So finally, they gave me morphine in my arm, and that knocked me out. And somewhere in there, I demanded a CT scan, which you have seen, but let's describe it to our listeners. If the normal gallbladder is the size of a jelly bean, mine was the size of, I've described it.
A large cat.
It was a large cat. I've described it multiple ways, but the best way I think I'm going to describe it to keep it clean for our listeners is, when I was in high school, my dad put rice in a tube sock so that he could throw it in the microwave and warm it up and put it around his neck. That is what my gallbladder
Did he invent that? Was your dad the inventor of that?
Yes, he was.
So that was the look. I've seen it, and that is exactly the look. That's a good way to explain. And it was the size of a large tube sock.
Yes, it was.
And so they were not going to be able to see you. And so you went into action for advocacy, gallbladder advocacy.
They did send me home, and they said, just follow up with a surgeon sometime this week. So my husband called a surgeon the next day. They said, we can probably fit her in the next week. And I was like, no, I can't. Did not feel like my body could sustain that level of pain for that long. So I called my OBGYN, whose services I have not needed in years. But she is a close friend. And so I said, hey, here's the situation. Could I please get an ultrasound? I have no idea at this point if an ultrasound is going to show gallbladder or if it just shows babies. I don't know. But she said, yes, come in at 11:30. So I got in. They took one look at my gallbladder, and she got on the phone with the surgeon. And she was like, stay by your phone because you need to be seen by somebody. So they called me that afternoon. I went in and I had surgery the next day, at which point they discovered that it was full of gangrene.
You are the most disgusting friend I have. And I have seen pictures, and you can see gangrene. You can actually see it. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you were within days of that thing.
They said that if I had waited
and done what they advised.
Exactly. If I had sat back and just complied, I would not be here talking to you right now.
And why am I laughing?
Why are you laughing?
It is so, and here's some equity for you. And I shared this. I was so mad. You don't know because you was out, but I talked to your mother about this and got her fired up when I brought you some barbecue, because I figure you need barbecue, which probably got you in this gallbladder shape to begin with. But I told your mother there is a difference in equity when a woman needs to see a doctor and when a man needs to see a doctor. I have lived this. Now, this is not what kind of research. What is your data when it's just your observation? It's just your
qualitative
data. So I have watched over the years where my mother or someone has got to see a doctor, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And my husband can get a crick in his neck. And I have witnessed this. The doctor rings him up. How quick can we see you, buddy? Are you in a lot of pain? Well, I'm okay. And I'm sorry if I'm offending, but there's no equity when it comes to a woman needing to get in to see the doctor or a man needing to get in to see the doctor. And from my own experience, other people may have other experiences, but that has been my experience.
I may skew your data with my size and stature.
They may have thought you were a man. So I don't know. You are a big gal.
Don't make me laugh.
I wasn't supposed to make you laugh. But and another thing, that is so scary that you really have to advocate for yourself. At what age? I mean, it's like when they're little, the doctors are all about it. Like, get them right in if they've got a sore throat or whatever. When you get an adult, I can blow a body part.
Yeah.
You're in your 40s. You're good to
Well,
go. And that can be a little daunting task. And this is case in point. I mean, this is really a scary situation.
yes. And then they sent me home with some devices and apparatuses attached
Yes.
to me and sewn into me that I should not have been trusted with.
Nobody should trust you with those things. So you literally got those things kinked up and they couldn't get them out of a knot or whatever.
And that was another place, like for real, 100%. I did not think I was going to make it that day. It was very scary. And I just, like, I was really, I thought, well, Kim's going to have to take it from here.
I don't mean for you to be offended in any way about this, but I was already interviewing for your replacement. And but I felt like you do the same.
I feel like you and Laura Ross or you and Olivia were really
they were both calling me. They were both calling me. Russ Sabella. Well, I had a lot of folks that were calling me saying, can I be your new, if she doesn't make it, God forbid she doesn't make it, so there was a lot of I want you to know, a lot of interest, and I hope that makes you feel better. I had already been practicing songs for the funeral.
Oh, what was your front runner?
Oh, it was The Wind Beneath My Wings.
Of course,
was going to be.
Yes.
If you ever know that you're my hero, there'd be tears, there'd be pictures behind me.
Yes.
And then I don't know, I had some, and then just speaking, just speaking. So I had all that. Like I said, I was ready. I had your bags packed.
Well, hear it now. My living will is, when the day comes, I do want you to plan my funeral because I feel like you do a bang up job.
I think it'd be a bang up job. So I know that you look, please take this the way I mean it. You look horrible.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I feel like that is a badge of honor. I wear it as a badge of honor.
There is no way I'm going to take, because you whatever you're doing to increase sympathy is working.
Okay.
It is working. And I don't know that you've ever missed a week of work, and you missed a week of work.
I have not.
I'm really not sure going forward.
Like, besides having children, I told JC, my husband, I said, I don't think I've missed a week of work, like with all my days added up. I don't know that it's been more than a week of work.
God, I wish I could say that. No.
Well,
here's AKA that trip to the beach where I FaceTimed our superintendent.
Oh my God.
While on pain medication.
I forgot about that.
Yes, that's one of my funnies. So anyway, I'm just spit some food. I didn't mean to. I am very excited about the guests that our listeners are going to hear. They were the keynote speakers at the Savannah in Savannah at the National Youth at Risk Conference just a few months ago. And no, they were one of the keynote speakers, and it was the last day. And I thought, no, I'm not, however, a lot of people pack up and leave and on that last day, but I went that last day, and it was just an incredible, they did an incredible job. Yeah, and I called you, I did, and I said, I have just met, or I heard, when I did meet them afterwards, two incredible, energetic women who what they have to say makes such sense. And I was so excited. I don't want to give too much away, but they have started a Centergy Project, and people can look into that because that's going to bring a lot of what is the word I'm looking for? A lot of resources, a lot of resources. But I was so excited because it was just so simple. We love Rubber Meets the Roads, and it just makes such sense. And we do it on a small scale with our minute meetings. We give students voice, and they do it in on a large scale where they are listening to small groups or maybe individuals and giving them voice. But then they find out what the big change agents that need to happen. A lot of times that's not found within the school. It's not found within you as the school counselor. So they take that student voice and whatever the needs are, they bring in agencies and experts, and not only bring them in, like I'm not talking about they bring them in to speak one time, they bring them in to the school as part of what these students have said we needed. And they meet that need right there in the school with these agencies who are partnering instead of in silos. They're partnering all together with the heart of the community anyway, which is the school. So it just makes sense, but it just seems so large. But people are doing this. I mean, school systems are doing this. For the first time, I'm hearing of health clinics going into the school. And that's mind blowing for a lot of people. But they're thinking more than just health clinics. They're thinking about other, from small things like a laundry cert, like a washer dryer, which you've been there and done that, to the bigger pictures with these bigger agencies. So I don't want to give more away, but that's just kind of, it inspired me. Maybe I'm not there to do the big agencies, but it inspired me to listen to how important. And I immediately started talking to my students and giving them a bigger voice before I just assume I know what they need, and allowing them to speak about what works and what doesn't work, and why it doesn't work might be that they have needs that are not being met or filled. So anyway, hang on. This is a great episode. And like I said, it will, if it's something maybe you want to share with your district at a district level or whatever, but the resources are there. These women offer that through their project. They're going to talk about that in this broadcast.
Well, I'm excited for our listeners to hear it. And one thing that I really love about this episode is no matter what level you are, like if you're elementary, middle school, or high school, I believe that there is a takeaway here for you. So I'm really excited. So let's get to it.
Laura, you are in for a treat.
I'm excited because you have been talking about these two since you came back from a conference in March. You called me while you were there.
I did.
You said, oh my goodness, I've got some people that you've got to meet, and you haven't shut up about them since. And so I'm excited to grab onto your excitement, and I can't wait.
Did y'all hear something break in my house?
No.
Something just fell, or either somebody's breaking in. So if I am,
the show must go on.
The show's going to go on. So yes, Laura, we were in Savannah, Georgia, at the National Youth NYA.
It's the National Youth Advocacy and Resiliency Conference in March in Savannah.
That is the first time I'd ever gone and to this, ever been at this conference, and this was my favorite session that these ladies presented. So Linda and Leah, if y'all will introduce yourselves and just kind of tell us who you are, what you do, and how you got started. I know that's a lot, but I know you have a lot of information to share. So I will just turn it over to you to lay the groundwork for who you guys are.
All right, Linda, you want to start?
Well, why don't you start, and then I'll tell how I tagged along.
Okay. So my name is Leigh Colburn, and I'm a, now 34-year educator, 30 years in either the classroom as a teacher or as an administrator. I started in elementary school, and I was in elementary school for the first 17 years of my career. So a teacher and then an assistant principal and a principal in the elementary setting. And then in the last 13 years of my career, I was in high school. So I went from being an elementary high school principal, I transitioned into being a high school principal. And so for 10 years, I was a high school principal. And then in the last 2 years, I launched and started the district's wraparound center, which is kind of like a one-stop shop of human services for students and families. And so I partnered with a lot of nonprofit, state and local agencies and opened what was called at that time the Graduate Marietta Student Success Center, where I'd been the principal at Marietta High School. And that's how this all started.
And I'm Linda Beggs. My background is more of an adult ed. I have a business background. I graduated from the Terry College of Business at UGA, Go Dogs. And so I worked as a consultant in a lot of different corporations, nonprofits, for-profits around climate, culture, change management, personal effectiveness. Actually, I met Leigh when she was a 14-year-old freshman at Marietta High School, the school she went on to be principal of later, when I started dating her big brother. And so while she went through all various levels of her school leadership, I was there, and she'd chime in and say, hey, read this, fix this, whatever. And so we were really side by side in that. And I watched her grow as a leader and just so impressed with the work she did at the Student Success Center. And then when she decided to retire, we teamed up and decided we would take my corporate and business background with nonprofits, chambers, and so on, and her work in schools to launch the Centergy Project, which is a play on the word Centergy and center, because we really do try to bring all of those resources where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
That is, what have we been doing, Laura? Obviously nothing. Listen to this. I mean, we just created this Centergy Project after all of this great work there, but it sounds like everything that you did led you both to this great work that this was new to me when I heard you guys speak. So one of the things that I was so excited I shared with Laura was just giving the students voices, giving a voice to, instead of the decisions being made by leaders only, actually giving a voice and listening to the students. But talk to us a little bit about when we say the voice or the voice processes, what exactly is that, and how are you using that?
Of course. And when we talk about student voice, it's really bigger than giving voice in the classroom. We're talking about involving students around conversations related to school improvement, particularly for bringing in outside services to deliver at school. So we do have 5 voice processes we outline in our book we wrote called The Wraparound Guide by Solution Tree. And it does all begin with student voice. And so we start with that because we find that's a great way to build trust, which is at the heart of the work we do. So if you're going to get students and their families to open up about their needs, you really do have to do that on a foundation of trust. And we actually start by simply listening, asking very intentional questions about their school experience. And so doing that starts to strengthen those relationships between the students and families in their schools and administrators, counselors, and so on. And then and this is key, once they see their ideas and voices acted upon, then you really do start to sow those seeds of hope. And it's a very virtuous cycle when schools become inculcated in student voice, that you find that it really does open up a lot of new ideas for school improvement. I have to tell you, there's hardly a session I go to where I'm not simply stunned by the maturity, by the insight of students when you ask the right questions. So you mentioned conversation circles, and that's really big, broad conversations. It can be anything from how do we have better pep rallies? How do we get more participation in the band program? It could be anything really. But for our purposes, we ask about what are the needs of students. We're really trying to dig into what are those barriers that happen outside of school that we can start to address. So we start with what are the academic needs? And then we move into behavioral ideas. So Leigh likes to phrase it, and she does most of the facilitation of these on what is it that you need to do? What are the things you need to know to get a job? And what are the things, if you don't know it, will make you lose a job? And that's where we learn about what they call adulting 101, how to do taxes, how to dining etiquette, those types of adulting things. Then we ask about social services. If we were going to bring in outside experts who maybe weren't school employees, what could they, what kinds of needs? And that's where we get to a lot of really heavy things like addiction and domestic violence or dating violence or anger management and conflict resolution, incarcerated loved ones, and the list goes on. And then we also ask about health needs, if a school's maybe talking to a local hospital or public health. And then finally, what are family needs? And that's where we learn about the need for basic needs, whether it's clothing, food, etc. So that's what conversations are. So conversation circles are, is a way to really start to open up those conversations.
That is so exciting. This is the part that got me so excited. I actually went back to my school and I actually put up the chart paper and started having conversations with my middle schooler, in which we have had a difficult year with middle school this year. And so I just started asking those questions, and it was, I mean, I'm thinking, how did I get the cart before the horse before? It's like this makes such sense to really listen to the students and what their needs are and what can we do. So I love it. This was the part that really fired me up and got me excited. Laura and I believe in listening to students and interviewing students. We call it minute meetings, but I just felt like this was taking it to a whole different level. So I know that in your wraparound book, you talk about off-track interviews. Can you tell me what an off-track interview would be?
Sure. That's where we suggest this is not big groups. These are one-on-one conversations, or maybe two-on-one in a neutral location. So it's not being called to the principal's office. Though when Leigh was principal, she herself conducted those off-track interviews. And it's really, you define what your criteria it is. Maybe it is maybe they failed math or English and they're as a freshman, or maybe they're going to age out. I mean, there are any number of criteria you could use, but it's someone who's off track. And it's very intentional questions about their school experience. It's not they're in trouble. It's really an idea to understand what's happening. And these are very intentional questions. You'll see them laid out in the wraparound guide. But for example, one of the key questions is, when did it begin to go off track for you? And that really gives you a chance to listen to the students. You'll have in front of you things like their school. So you'll know their Lexile scores, and you can see their attendance dropping maybe from middle school to high school, or they had a rough transition. You'll see all that, but it's important to hear what happened to them. And what you'll hear is nothing to do with academics for the most part. It's about family issues that have happened, a divorce, a storm, a fire, being arrested. Those are the things that you hear about. And the purpose of that off-track interview is to help come up with a plan for that student. Sometimes it means they stay there at the school and have some interventions, but sometimes maybe they transition to some alternative forms of education that might be better suited for them.
Laura, that is so exciting. Is that how powerful is just that off-track interview? Because so many times we just assume, or we really don't, we get so busy in education, we don't care why they're off track. It's just, you're off track. Now fix it, but shape up. And I love that, having time to take that conversation. This is speaking to the school counselor, is it not, Laura? I mean, this is our language.
Yes, that's what I was thinking, that, as you were talking, I'm hearing a lot of things that hit that school counselor's heart. You were talking about how we have those scores in front of us. And so we see the data and we know to disaggregate the data, and we know to look for those subgroups that may be falling behind. We know how to identify the people that may have the struggles, but we always say, in fact, we have a segment in our podcast called Everyone Has a Story. And when we know that story, that's the missing puzzle piece a lot of times as to, just like you were saying, what has caused that drop in attendance or those scores to drop or whatever. So I'm excited because I feel like a lot of times as school counselors, we may have the data piece, we may have the story, but then we don't know what to do next with it.
And even one of the questions is, are you on track to graduate?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the kids will say, yeah, what are you talking about? Well, not really. So sometimes that's an education piece for them to really understand. And yes, their counselor may have sat down with them many times, and yet it's still, they think they're fine because they're still showing up to school or whatever. And sometimes they say, no, they're not, which of course makes you think, well, then why are you coming? Right. And there's a reason, right? Maybe, a relationship, maybe the
court order
sent them there. Yeah, maybe the court sent them. The court may have sent them there to attend, but they can't make them pass. And then sometimes kids say, I used to. And which of course is a heartbreaking answer.
How powerful though for them to have someone to get to hear them, what they have to say.
Linda, if you'll let me interrupt, I was just going to give you some of the other questions. So we usually just start out with saying, please tell me about your experiences in school. It's really important to hear it from them, what their perspective is. Students are the expert of their own school experiences. Mm-hmm. Sometimes adults try to be the expert, and we try to maybe re-script their story. The kids are the authors of their own school experience. So really listening to them. So we say, please tell me about your experiences in school. We ask, are you on track to graduate? I think one of the most compelling questions we ask in high school is, do you see yourself as a high school graduate? Like Linda just said. And you may hear yes, you may hear no. You may hear, I used to. We ask, when did it begin to go off track for you? We ask, what could we have done differently, or what could we do differently now to help you address any concerns that are getting in the way of your graduation? And we talk about wellness as well as achievement. We ask if there's one person on campus with whom they have a strong relationship, because it's important to know who they consider as an ally and who they trust. And we really do script that question the way that we're talking about an adult. It's important to know if they even have a friend at school, a peer. But it's also important to know who is an adult in that building that they have a significant relationship with. And then we ask them, what do they see as their next steps? And sometimes it's a matter of falling in line with their vision, quite honestly, especially with a student who is in danger of aging out before they can graduate. I think these are important to do even if a student is going to an alternative school. I think these are important interviews to do even if it comes to you that a student is considering dropping out. Because I think hopefully you've done it before that, but if you haven't, at least your last conversation with them, they feel seen and heard, and maybe they're given some dignity as they choose to exit. And I think that's important. So the off-track interviews can be done at any point during the year. They can be done by different people. And a lot of counselors have their own ways of doing it, their own favorite questions. That's fine. We have found that these questions are field tested and they seem to yield a lot of information. So like with any of our processes, Linda and I say, take what works for you and then consider adding in some of the questions that we suggest, or just kind of make it your own. You may want to reword them to make it more reflective of your own style. That's fine. But you want to get to, what are their experiences been thus far? What do they see for themselves right now? Do they see themselves as a graduate? And how are their school experiences now? Who do they trust? What's going well? What's not? And then where do they see themselves in the future? And how do they see themselves moving on from here? So I think those are all. And then when I'll start telling you about the 7 steps. I'll tell you that as a principal, I began with off-track interviews. And began there when I was trying to raise my graduation rates. One of my particularly wise department chairs said to me, as we were trying to do everything we could think of to do in the school, and my teachers were just crumbling from initiative fatigue, from credit recovery to after school to twilight school to online school to advanced courses to remedial courses to, I mean, we just were killing our teachers. And we were still just chasing that rabbit, right? Trying to raise that graduation rate. And one of my particularly bright teachers said to me, I wonder what our kids would say. I wonder what our kids would say about raising our graduation rate. I wonder what they would say are the barriers to help in learning. And that's what really began our story, was with off-track interviews.
I can
And
see
just
this
to
as
add
a-
in is I'm sorry, I'm gonna throw something in
No,
here
please.
from the corporate world. This is also, I see you both nodding, that the importance of this. It's so easy to not do it though, because it's not urgent. You know, it's just, you're going to get trapped into the whirlwind of everything else that's happening, and you've got very, very full plate. So it takes a great deal of intentionality to make this part of your rhythm, you know, a couple a week. You know, it doesn't have to be like the daunting task of all of the off-track kids, but just get into where it's a thing you do couple of times. It's like, think of it as exercise 3 times a week, you know, something like that.
I love that word intentionality, because we do get caught up with everything, putting out the fires. And this is exciting. And I can see this as a whole, I can see a high school. I'm thinking of a high school team that is doing this, working together. So it's going to take some off of the school counselor, because not everybody has their people, and to be a team in a high school, to work together, because those high school kids can get lost. And our friends who are high school counselors, they don't have the time that we do. Laura and I, working with middle and under, our job is to make sure they're on track. But I see that our high school friends, a lot of times, they have got to make sure, their hair's on fire. They're just trying to get the scholarships, the graduation, the scheduling, the credits. And so I can see this being a team effort. And I know our school system, Coleman County, was very interested. And I know that one of our leaders spoke with you guys, and I'm going to speak with her again about, we need more of this. This is exciting. Laura, I know I cut you off, as I do all the time. What are your thoughts, Laura?
Well, I feel like Leigh left us on a cliffhanger right there whenever she said that one of her teachers said, I wonder what the students would say the greatest barriers are. And I am very curious, what have you found to be the most common barrier that students have said?
So I'll tell you, there's a part in the book where I talk about being a principal back in 2013 or 2014. And in one day, and I know Kim heard this when we presented, in one week, I did about 18 off-track interviews with students. And for me, I defined off-track as students who were more than 2 years off track, okay? So your 16-year-old freshman, your 18-year-old sophomore. So these were students who truly were in danger of aging out. And when I asked them the question about when did it begin to go off track for you, I actually in the book include some of the answers that I got. And so I'll just go over some of them for you. One student said, I'm autistic, so school is really hard for me. Another student said, an affair my dad had nearly destroyed our family. Another student said, overcoming an eating disorder. Another one, I got pregnant. Another, I started smoking pot. At least that's where it started. Another student said, we've been homeless most of my life. Another student talked about his father's continual unemployment and how they'd had to move around so much because of that. A student talked about her mother's cancer. Another student, and I'll just read their responses. My father's suicide, my mother's incarceration for stealing from the school, coming to terms with and dealing with my homosexuality, my own cancer, being bisexual, my best friend's death, my mother's drug habit and all of her homelessness because of it, all the different men she brought in and out of our lives, working 2 jobs while I was in high school and taking all honors classes. And I guess I just quit. So in general, what you hear and what you may know from looking at the students' team records, you may already see when it began to go off track for them. And you may look at their schedule and you may think, gosh, they have 3 third grade teachers, or you may think that they've been in 5 different schools, and that may be a part of it. But why it's important to ask that question is, for many students, when you say, do you see yourself as a high school graduate? And in fact, you are talking to students who are in danger of not graduating in this situation. And you say to them, when did it begin to come off track for you? What you find is their story. So Linda mentioned the phrase, what happened to you? There's actually a great book. It's an Oprah Winfrey book with a doctor named Dr. Bruce Harvey that's called What Happened to You? And it allows students to tell their story. What we generally find is that their barriers to health and wellness fall in one of 7 categories. It's either transiency, which is about their mobility. It's about family changes, which could be grief, it could be pregnancy, it could be divorce, it could be incarcerated parent, it could be a sibling's death. They talk about poverty, and I've never heard students say, I'm not doing well in school because I'm poor. They never say that. But what you'll hear them talk about is homelessness, or a moving lot, or not having transportation, or not being able to afford summer school, or having a job, or caring for their siblings. Linda and I hear a good bit about addiction, and that could be anything from alcohol, drugs, technology, pornography. We hear about immigration and the struggles due to immigration. We hear about health, social, emotional, mental, physical, and we hear about trauma, about things that have happened to them, those adverse childhood experiences that have just, snowballed on them. And what Linda and I talk about is that if a student combines mobility and poverty with any of those other 5, family changes, addiction, immigration, health, or trauma, if those are combined with mobility and poverty, you have a very vulnerable child, because they do not have equitable access to the resources, the services, and the opportunity to see them through that difficulty. When they're mobile, they don't often have roots in a community. They don't often have the social capital for their parents to navigate and connect with social services. And I spent my whole 30 years in Title I schools. Now, that's not to say a student of affluence can't also be dealing with addiction or mental health.
Or family changes.
Or family changes. It just may mean that they have more access to the services.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
And that's where
Yeah.
the work equity comes in.
Yeah. This is exciting to me because so much of what we do is focused, and I think my brain is thinking these are things that when they're younger, and I think I heard y'all say that you're doing something with elementary or middle.
We have
more
some
things
elementary.
there. But I'm thinking about so many times that we're focused, like I said, on the elementary and middle, and then I'm glad that you guys are speaking with that, especially with that age of how are we going to get them through? How can we support them here at this age in high school? And how can we graduate them?
And often students in high school can give perspective on what they would have needed in elementary school that your elementary students really can't know.
I think that's your next book. What I wish elementary had known, or what I wish they had known in elementary. Because I was thinking those same kind of things, I meant these needs started somewhere.
And when we do focus groups and conversation circles with the high school students, we often ask them to advocate on behalf of their younger siblings. Especially when we're doing a deep dive on substance use with students, and a student makes a comment like, it's really hard to stay clean when drugs are just really available in my house. Okay. I may say, so you grew up in a house where drugs are really available to you. Tell me what that was like as an elementary school student. Tell me what that was like as a middle school student. Is there something the school could have done to have intervened in a way other than, yes, I understand calling DFACS, I understand that kind of stuff, but how could the school have intervened? I remember having a student in a deep dive on substance use talk about the fact but he wished that he had been in some type of focus group or some kind of support group for children, okay, who had parents dealing with addiction, because he said everybody knew my parents took drugs. I grew up in a drug house. I could have handled real conversation about drugs and the danger they are in your life at a much younger age because of the exposure I had already had to him. He said, I used for the first time in 4th grade. And people think you're not supposed to talk about drugs until somebody's in 8th or 9th grade, or maybe it's 6th grade. He said, I knew people talking to me about drugs in 2nd and 3rd grade, and everybody knew my parents were on drugs. He even made the comment, every judge in town knew my parents. But nobody talked to him candidly and realistically about drug use. And the drugs that were available and were around his home. So he talked about, he started drinking and for the first time in 4th grade. So it's just kind of interesting to hear them say, that the health curriculum should be differentiated for students that are dealing with mental health issues or mental health issues in their family or drug issues in their family. They're saying, these kids, they already see the effects of this even when they're really young. So, I think you have to be careful, of course, how you communicate that and what you do with it. But I think kids have a lot of insight when they're older about how those things affected them when they were younger.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I know we got to get going because Linda's got 3 more voice processes to get to. And then
Okay.
I've got to run you through the Centergy cycle.
Laura's not even unmuting because I'm talking so much. You may unmute, Laura, and go for it.
When I try, you jump in and it's not even worth it, Kim. You're so excited that I can't even compete today.
Go. Oh, seriously, she's a dick. So let's go on to the graduation stories. I know a little bit about that, but talk to us about the graduation stories.
I will. We're recording this in April of 2022, and this is a perfect time to start thinking about gathering reflective feedback from your students who are in transition years. It might be 5th, 8th, and of course, graduation stories. We spell out graduation stories in our book, but we're going to forward to you guys to share with your listeners a handout on how to do legacy and graduation stories. It's basically about taking that time at the right moment. And this is the right moment is after the hubbub of finals and all that. And there's this pause, certainly for seniors and even for kids making transitions. They think, oh, this is the last time I will be with this group. I'll be at this school. There's this poignancy that happens as they're more reflective and transparent. And if they're graduating and going across the stage, they're feeling pretty bulletproof and triumphant as they go. And so we ask them, basically, we spell out some questions and we ask them to choose 5 of them. And they can do it. The schools can do it a lot of different ways. We suggest that you give them as much autonomy as possible in how to answer that, whether it's an essay or a poem. We had one of the schools we worked with, the principal actually made the pitch to her senior class and had little bands, those little bracelets made that said save the date for their graduation date. So when they turned in their story, and it could be, again, a thumb drive with a video or an essay, piece of art, they would get this bracelet. It was a good way for her to go through the school and affirm, thanks for giving that. Hey, am I going to get that from you, kind of thing. And it gives a great way to collect that reflective feedback on your seniors, or your seniors of your school, I should say, experience about what experiences are most important to them. What did they consider their greatest accomplishments? What their plans are? Who really made a difference to them when they struggled in school? These are the types of questions that we ask, and you get terrific feedback if you do it well. And that's a big if. There are lots of ways to blow this. Don't turn it into a Google Doc and email it to people. You will not capture their hearts or minds. And we hear from kids, they're burned out on screens. They don't want to take another, they don't want to fill out another form. So ask that. And this is open-ended. You got to have a team there to read, just to scan to make sure there's not anything you need to act on. I'm unaware, Leigh, you might correct me. I don't know of any action that's had to be taken, that there's any emergency from a graduation story, like some kid discloses something. If it's happened, I'm
Not
unaware.
really. I mean, we've followed up with students before who, in sharing their story, have talked about something, and we've followed up to make sure it's been adjudicated properly. But I also just want to clarify, Linda said it, but she said it really quickly, that we have examples for 5th graders and for 8th graders as well. So the legacy stories are done during those last weeks of 5th grade or during those last weeks of 8th grade. And then graduation stories are done during the last weeks of being a senior.
And
great
some schools have, like, you could even do it like my niece goes to a elementary school where there's the K2 hallway and there's the 3-5 hallway. So you could actually do something like that with 2nd graders as they make the big move over to the other hallway.
Yeah.
So there are lots of chances to do that. So this is not anything that you have to like act on. It is a good way for you to gather that reflective feedback, know what works. If you've got a high school athletic director who's killing himself making the pep rallies hop, and people tell you that, it's a great way to give that positive feedback. And also to maybe find out some people who are really building relationships you're not aware of, as well as ways to improve your school. Leigh, you want to add anything else there?
Just one of the things that Kim and Laura, that we're going to do for your listeners is we're going to send you a template of the 5th grade stories, 8th grade stories, and the senior class stories. We'll send you those questions that we suggest that you ask. 5th grade teachers may decide to address one question a week during the last several weeks of 5th grade and let all their kids write a paragraph about it. It can be certainly customized any way you want, but we will send that to you so that your listeners can go in and can download those forms, because this is the perfect time of year to be doing that work.
These are great transitional activities. I love this. We do the transition. So this would be fine. I can imagine administrators finding out a lot of information from these stories of what is working in the school, what needs to be improved, like you said, Linda, in the school. And then just those people, that those unsung heroes may have that opportunity to be heard about. So that's awesome. And I know we are running out of time. So we're going to move.
We always
on.
do. We
I know,
always
I
do.
know. I think it's because y'all are so passionate.
Well, Linda can do that pretty quickly.
Okay, so let's move on to this. We're at the student voice needs assessment.
Yeah, so those first 3 we talked about, conversation circles, graduation legacy stories, and off-track interviews, are really for identifying needs. The next phase is to really start to prioritize. We turn conversation circles into a needs assessment that students take, so we can really just start to get some idea of potential caseloads, as Leigh will talk about how to go out and talk to potential partners, knowing is a food pantry going to be 40 families or 140 families, to start to just got to get an idea of the scope. And then focus groups are really deep dives into specific barriers. It might be substance use, incarcerated loved ones, stress and anxiety, to really get ideas about what we call full spectrum programming, everything from prevention. It's almost like tiering, like MTSS or whatever.
RTI.
Or RTI, either one, but this idea that there's prevention that's really for everyone, education awareness, support and intervention, and then sustainability. So really to get ideas of programming that from students, so that you can then take those to potential partners to talk about, here's what our kids say would help them.
I love it. And so we're pulling it all together now. And now we're going to, within the school, find areas of people that can help, but also within the community at large, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so far we've listened to them, we have found needs, and we're prioritizing and grouping these, and now we're going to go out and we're going to bring in whoever we need to, advocate, partnering with community, whatever. So tell me about, I know we just have, and I want to talk to you guys specifically about how school systems can get you or what they can do to get help from you guys. But just talk a little bit about the next, you've got the needs, and what do you do with that? Now you've got them grouped. What happens next? And that may go into the 7 steps. Is that?
It does. And so,
Okay.
one of the questions we talked about is, kind of, or we referenced before we started the podcast, is even like, why now, right? Like, why is student voice the right work at this time? And I would tell you that if you bought our book, The Wraparound Guide, the first 100 pages are on those 5 processes for gathering student voice.
Yeah.
And if you didn't even get to step 3, which is when you're going to begin to look at wraparound services, I would say right now, the relational trust between families and schools, or families and other organizations, whether that is law enforcement or healthcare, whatever have been those institutions in your community, we used to enjoy a higher level of trust. Law enforcement did, healthcare did, and education did.
Teachers, yes.
Teachers did. Students and families are more disconnected, more suspicious. And I feel like they do not feel seen and heard. And I think all you have to do is go to any local school board meeting right now, and you see that school board meetings are ground zero for culture wars in communities. And there's a lot of yelling. And typically when people start yelling, you should know that it's because they don't feel heard. Okay. So how can you take that temperature down a little bit? How do you build that relational trust? Linda and I talk about it starts with gathering voice, so you can strengthen relationships, so you can cultivate hope. And all of that is about the relational trust. So I think more than anything else, the gathering of voice right now is to deepen the connection and grow the relational trust between students and families and their communities. The other reason I think why now for wraparound is that I think schools have always been somewhat siloed, as has healthcare, as has law enforcement in your community. And so you may have a lot of people, a lot of agencies and organizations doing good things, but we're all doing those in silos, and we're not doing collaborative work. All of those agencies and organizations, we're reacting to our communities and our community needs rather than responding to our communities and our community needs. And we're not doing that collaboratively. Kids have never been more hyper-connected, overexposed, or grown up in the type of competitive environment that they do now. So Linda talked about those first 2 steps, the identifying needs and the establishing priorities. And that's all about those 5 voice processes. Then we start moving into identifying resources and establishing partnerships. So what we begin to do is, after we take that student voice needs survey, we begin to start looking at who in our agency provides these types of services. If it's a food bank that we need, who is our local food pantry? If it is addiction services, maybe in a restorative justice system, you might be looking at restorative practices for students who are using. Now that's different than the student who's actively selling drugs in your school. He's distributing. Okay, that's different. All right, and you have to have consequences, and that has to be different. But maybe the student who's using, you should wonder why they're using. What are those unmet needs? Why are they trying to change the way they feel? What is going on inside that child? And so what you quickly find is that mental health services become a big part of what schools ask for. Health services become a big part of that. Maybe more direct instruction on healthy relationships. We had a large domestic abuse and domestic violence shelter in our community, and all of the children for the families that went to seek shelter in that domestic violence center all came to my school. So it was important that we have lunch and learns on 10 signs of a healthy relationship, 10 signs of an unhealthy relationship. The only way children are ever going to break the cycle of these things that are impacting them is through a significant relationship and through information and education. And so you can help them through some of those things by bringing in those different services. So if you were to buy our book, the logistical nuts and bolts of it begin to start in this identifying resources and establishing partnerships. It's about how to asset map your community. It's about, if we're really going to create equity, if we're really going to create equitable access to resources, services, and opportunity, what does that look like in the world of safety and justice, health and wellness, academic opportunity, college and career transition, basic needs, community services? Who is it in your community that's doing those things? So our book literally teaches you how to have a really highly effective community strategic planning meeting, counselors a lot of times already have asset mapping in their resource guides and in their resource mapping, but how do you begin to organize that in a way that it becomes actionable? Or you can become someone, or maybe not the counselor, but the school system in general, becomes the facilitator for collaboration between those agencies. It was unusual, but it certainly happened that there were times that we had to call the police department sometimes because maybe a parent is so escalated in our school that they're threatening a teacher, or they're having what my husband, who's a cop, would say is a high-speed come apart in the office. But you know what you found is that when the police showed up, they usually already knew that family. Typically, I would suggest so that the doctors in the ER often already know that family. So your agencies and your communities are already working with a lot of the same families. We're just not doing it in a very synergistic, collaborative, or effective way. So if you think about having an IEP meeting for a student, for example, and bringing all the different teachers that work with that student together, this is almost like having an IEP meeting for a family. Who are all the different agencies and organizations that mama, that grandmama, that single that need to have access to? Because what you find is that they never need just one thing. Never, not when they're in crisis. They need to be touched by multiple different types of agencies and organizations and to be able to work with that. So there's identifying needs and establishing priorities. That's in that gathering voice. And then there's with identifying resources and establishing partnerships. Then we talk about how do you fund all this? Like superintendents quickly asked, how are we going to pay for all this? Linda and I did have a whole chapter in the book about how you braid state, federal, and local funding to pay for this. If the school system is paying more than 20 to 25% of this, I would say that they're paying too much. Okay, it needs to come more from agencies and organizations who already are staffing to meet those needs. Okay, so let's think about the way a school system has a nurse, maybe from public health. They're still paid for and employed by, and they're still supervised public health, but their caseload is in your building, so that's where they are. The same with the school resource officer. They may still be employed by the police department, certified by the police department. Their retirement, their liability all comes through the police department, but your school becomes their precinct, their zone. All right. Same with a mental health provider, or maybe a Department of Human Services case manager. Maybe they have, a caseload of 20 to 25 kids, and those are students who have families, but they're students in your school. So can that case manager simply have an office at your school? You're not changing how they're paid. You're not changing how they're licensed or they're supervised. You're not in charge of their professional learning anymore because they don't become your employee. They co-locate a representative from their agency in your building. And so what you simply say to those agencies when you're meeting with them is, we believe you're doing really good work, and we believe our students and families need better access to you. Can you tell me how we can help you achieve your mission better with our students and our families? And what you find is that the homeless shelter, the addiction and recovery services, the police department, they know you have access to those students and families. Typically, they've been beating on the door to get in, and we just haven't been able to figure out how to work with them. Schools have kind of created cages of our own design, and this is a way of breaking down that cage so that you can work more effectively and more efficiently with those organizations. So the funding is a collaborative model where you're literally braiding the strands of state, federal, and local funding. And then the last two are create your structure, which is the what, where, how, when. When are we going to provide services? Where is this center going to be located? How are we going to do it? What are we going to do? So you're creating your structure, which is literally figuring out how you're going to house these different agencies and what kind of office supplies and materials they need to come on site. And then the last is just what we call the WIG, your wildly important goal, which is connecting your families and students with services. Again, how are you going to do that? But then how are you going to measure what matters for your families, and how are you going to report that data back? What are the processes and the procedures need to be? Can there be a common intake form from your different agencies? They might still have some individual questions, but about 80% of the questions they ask a family are the same for every single agency. So can you bring that together in a more collaborative way? How are you going to collect your data? And then how are you going to aid those agencies in working together? And I hear counselors saying, I can hear you already, when am I going to have time to do all that? You have to understand your superintendent, your principals, your director of student services, they have to be on board with this. The counselors would advise the process, but I never expect the counselors to facilitate that and be in charge of all that. I was in charge of it as the principal at my school. We work with superintendents and we work with people at the central office as well as board members. And when we come in and consult with those agency heads as well to figure out what that infrastructure is going to look like. But those are your 7 steps. Identifying needs, establishing priorities, identifying resources, establishing partnerships, securing funding, creating your structure, which is a wraparound center, which is where you co-locate service providers inside your school system. And then how do you create your students and families with services? That's our 7 steps that are all spelled out in our book, The Wraparound Guide. We'd love for you to read it and email us and give us some feedback, or if you have questions. As Linda said, it's available through Solution Tree. And one of the great things about Solution Tree is that all the forms in the book are downloadable off the Solution Tree website. So you can find them there. But if you ever have a hard time doing that, if you bought our book, you just email us. It's either Leigh or Linda, whoever you're emailing, at thecentergyproject.com, and ask us for something in Word form. Tell us you bought the book. And you'd like to have that form, and Linda and I are happy to share that with individuals who purchase the book and what they want to see.
I'll also add that if any listeners are interested in like seeing a wraparound center and what it looks like, they can go to our website. And if they go under the tab that says wraparound centers, we've got view a model, and it's like a VRBO tour. And each room will provide information. There's at the bottom of the screen, there's a little icon with an eye on it, which will give information about the purpose, funding, and how it's used, staffing, how it's used. I would like to just loop back a little bit and say, in terms of staffing, the one thing we really highly recommend that the school do is create a director of this initiative, because it cannot be added on to anyone else's plate. I mean, Leigh said she did do that as principal, and it ended with her resigning to become the director because it was a full-time job in and of itself. So that's the one new position that the school should take on.
This is so big, and I am so impressed that you guys were, you know, this is a big thing that you guys are talking. It's a lot, and that y'all created and done. I think it's so important. And I think at this conference in Savannah was the first time that I was starting to meet other school systems that are bringing in agencies into the school, like healthcare facility in the school. And right. But this just makes sense, and kind of how you can make this work.
But I'd like to add, just kind of answering a question we hear a lot, which is, how long does this take, right? They want to know, how much does it cost and how long does it take? Well, we sometimes will spend 12 to 18 months gathering voice. It doesn't mean you can't start talking to potential partners and maybe even pushing in some services. Like if you know you need laundry services, well, you could go ahead and set up a laundry room for students and families to use while continuing the process. But a lot of times how fast it goes depends upon the social capital your school has with it depends on the social capital that the school has with the community. Yeah, so yeah. Leigh was able to do it pretty quickly because, as we mentioned, she was the principal of the high school she graduated from. So all those relationships were in place. It was phone calls. It wasn't introductions. It was more like, hey, I got this idea, as opposed to, oh, I'm the principal of the high school and I'd like to talk to you, you know? Yeah. So all that already happened for years. So
I love the way, and I think a selling point for this is not necessarily selling, but a big point of this is you're not bringing unneeded agencies. You're listening to what the needs are, and then you're meeting the need with the agency. But you know, I thank you guys. I know that we kept you a little bit longer than we said we were going to.
Well, Laura, since this was all new to you, do you have any questions?
Well, my mind is just really spinning. I can see a follow-up conversation once I really dive in, and you know, hearing this for the first time from somebody other than Kim, who doesn't explain things well, I'll just say, it's been really, I can see how Kim would be very excited about this.
Yeah, it just makes sense. It just makes sense to match needs.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about how many times as a counselor have you had a family that has had several agencies already working with them? And you guys touched on that. But it's like this agency is not talking to this agency, and this agency is not talking to this agency. And it's okay. It's not, it's not their fault. But we're the hub, I guess. So we're talking to all the agencies, and this sort of brings everybody together and says, hey, let's all get on the same page. But you start out doing that. So it's not something 7 months down the road, you realize, right, you know what, we should all be in the same room at the same time. It sounds like very proactive.
Once a month, you're having a meeting with all those agency heads together where you can respond to, a local crisis or a community issue. Interesting you said that, Laura. One of our centers, one of our client schools is Gainesville High School, and their wraparound center is called the Hub. That's what they named it. So they've called it the Hub, where they have all the agencies and organizations. That's where they meet to talk about families and things. They call it the Hub.
Very fitting.
And this is a lot. We know this is a lot for our listeners. And that's why I'm glad you're adding some things and we're linking some things, because I really feel like in my heart that there are people who have been looking for this. They know, but y'all have done the hard work. You've put, this is how we can do this. And so I think it's going to answer a lot of need. And I think that's why when our county representatives, I was there with some of those, and when they heard you guys, we were excited. And actually there was a plan for us to meet back together and talk about it. And then I had something happen in my school. It didn't happen, but I'm going to have them revisit this podcast and revisit this for our own system. And I think now's the time to have the conversation, because there's money out there more than we've had in the past. And so this is going to meet some needs, right, and it makes
that money, that ESSER money is about literally the tagline of creating equitable access to services, resources, and opportunity. That is an ESSER line. Yeah. So the money that's flowing into schools is also flowing into nonprofits and state and local agencies as well. Yeah. It is intended. It is supposed to be for intentional partnership and collaboration in communities to sustain families.
I am so in love with y'all. I'm so excited. You're speaking our language, and I just can't wait to dive in deeper to all of this. And I think as we end our year and look to our next year, that you guys, listeners, get this information. And
I want to go ahead. You finish your thought.
No, that's it. If it doesn't apply, but there's so much here that you could, I'm thinking if I couldn't make it all work, I feel like that's what I want to look at. What's going to work for me in my rural school?
Well, and I want to go back to something. I think, Leigh, you said it, talking about the counselor, like, how do I have time for this? I see it the opposite way. I see that this is such a time saver whenever, it may be some work on the front end to get it established and everything. But once it's in place, I think about all the phone calls that I make each day to various agencies. And, you go on sort of a rabbit chase, hunting down the right agency to fit the appropriate need. But I see if this were in place, it would be a time saver.
Yeah, we talk about how you transition from a school that makes external referrals to being able to just walk down the hall and representatives from the agencies and the organizations are there. It's
I can't even imagine.
Time saver.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
That would be great for communities as well. Those agencies begin to talk to each other about things that aren't actually necessarily school related, but it does grow the social capital of your entire community.
Yeah.
And if you've also got the food pantry there and the laundry services there and the clothing closet there and the school supplies closet there, and it's just all right there.
Yeah.
So it really can be like a one-stop shop for student and human services. And it's just a revisioning, right? It's just revisioning.
Thinking outside the box. Yeah,
going
it is
forward.
revisioning. And I know that my head was like exploding when I did realize that school systems, some of these already have agencies in the school with them. And I'm like, how? So this is a way for us to think outside the box and think bigger. Thank you guys. I just cannot thank you enough. I was so excited to get to hear you just a little bit more in a private conversation. So it was such an honor to get to do that.
Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
So aren't they amazing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like just constant ideas and people that you want to be around.
And there's an Alabama connection there. So that was exciting. But I don't know. I'm amazed when people go on big scales and do things on a huge scale. And that is a huge scale, but they know what they're doing. And the confidence that they exude and the abilities to get the funding and the things that are needed to bring in these agencies into the school,
Well, and I think, start small. It's kind of like what you said when we were opening this, that you may do student voices, or what we do is minute meetings, and you may discover that you need a washer and dryer, and that may be a big venture for your program. And that's one step that you can take in listening to student voices. And I would just encourage our listeners, don't think that you have to find office space for the CPS worker and the doctor and everybody all at once. Just start small.
And I think if that is an avenue that you wanted to go down, I think this would be the folks that I would definitely want to. How do you make this work? And one of the things that I picked up in this in talking with these great women is just that there's this it may take years of listening to student voices. I mean, it may take an entire year or two or whatever it's going to take just to hear the voices, and you can build that. I guess you're building that data up and see what the need is for your school. And while that might not work exactly a specific way because of your location, but you might have to think outside the box for that. So I love that I love fresh ideas. And when you're thinking, what, people are doing that? That's exciting. Yeah. That's great. So I think it just, there's a lot to learn about taking our ideas and using them, even if this is not it. They inspire me to try big things. But I love this idea.
Well, and we've said before, like whenever we've talked about building your advisory council, we've talked about how a lot of these agencies are looking for ways to get into the school. So something that may seem out of touch may not be out of touch at all, or out of reach. It may not be at all.
Absolutely. So anyway, I think it was it inspired me. It made me think differently. It was a fresh word. So I hope you enjoyed it, and go to the Centergy Project, and we're going to link some things for you. And I will turn it over to you look like a half-drowned cat friend.
Well, thank you. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Instagram. You can join our weekly newsletter. Look us up on counseloraccents.com. There's a lot of information there about, summer's coming. And if you want us to do PDs for your school, then now is the time to book some of our last remaining weeks that we have available. Anything else? Is there anything else?
I've got a new filter on here and I keep playing with it, and I've got to stop. I'm not even listening to you is what I'm saying.
Okay, then I think we're done.
I think we're done. Please hear my heart. Done.